Thanks for coming. My name's Robert Kennedy. I'm a web search SRE, and I had the good fortune a few years ago now to meet David Schwaderer through a mutual friend, and it's been really exciting to get to know him, and I'm still getting to know him. He's a very interesting guy. I'll tell you a little bit about him before I let him take over. He has a master's degree in applied math from Caltech and an MBA from USC. He's worked at IBM, EDS, Adaptec, Symantec, and Silicon Valley startups. He's authored 6 commercial software programs for a variety of machine architectures in several different languages, dozens of articles, and 10 technical books. He regularly presents at Silicon Valley companies like Oracle, Sun, Symantec, and Google, as well as universities like Stanford, MIT, and Naval Postgraduate School. His October 2007 MIT Innovation Lecture was selected as the best in the conference, and his soon-to-be-published 11th book follows more than 10 years of research and is titled Innovation Survival, Concept, Courage, Chance, and Change. This is his 4th Google Innovation presentation. Please welcome David Schwaderer.
Thank you very much. It's indeed a pleasure and a privilege to come back. I always love good audiences. This is a good audience. That said, this is not a leisurely walk down innovation lane. Fair warning. We got 81 slides, and as Captain Kirk says on the bridge of the Enterprise, we will do this. Are you ready? Strap it on, hang on. Take a look at this guy here. If you live a life, or any of your friends live a life devoid of innovation, it greatly increases the chances that you're going to look like this guy. On the other side of the coin, if you live a life full of innovation, way out there on the edge, chances are you've greatly increased the probability you're going to look exactly like the same guy. Okay? Innovation is a two-edged sword. What you find is that most people's perceptions of what it is are completely wrong. And we're going to be getting into some of that. And if you're surprised by some of this lecture material, you will enjoy it. Now notice this poor guy may be on the street for a variety of reasons, none of which are his fault. It's a wonderful article in Atlantic Magazine. You can search on Jobless Era and Transform America, Atlantic Magazine, boom, it'll pop right up. Talks about the various things that have gone wrong in the country, like marching to Wall Street's quarterly earnings expectations, patent system breakdowns, and things like that. So people can lose their innovation, so can companies. Look at the late, great Polaroid Corporation. Look at what has been going on in Kodak, the inventor of the digital camera. Look at what's happening right now over in Milpitas at Adaptec Corporation, once $1 billion corporation. It's always the same story. Companies can lose it. But if companies can lose it, guess what? So can regions. Here is the 2010 Silicon Valley Index, recently out a couple of months ago. It says that the standing of the valley in innovation in the world, as far as new technology, is at risk. You should not be complacent. Innovation, innovators, and things like that appear 65 times in this particular report. So if regions can lose it, guess what? Countries can lose it as well. This is an article in the Wall Street Journal about India and innovation and how they have decided that they will observe patents all across the world except in drugs, and they'll only do the ones there that they feel are innovative to their specifications. So countries can lose it, which affect regions, which affect companies, which affect guys like that in the beginning slide. Now, my name is Dave Schwaderer. I have studied innovation diligently for 12 years in 6 different contexts. This is my 4th presentation here. The previous 3 at Google are the underlined ones. There is one that I have not done, Innovation in Sports, Evolution of the Surfboard. Today's lecture is Innovation in Science. And by science, you know, there's A to Z, avionics all the way to zoology. I primarily mean earth science. You will meet the work of these 5 gentlemen in this presentation. The 2 on the left died about a week after, or just a couple of days after that picture was taken on the ice shelf out in Greenland in 1930. The other 3 were ardent supporters of the gentleman all the way on the left, who was one of the greatest living scientists at the time, and actually one of the greatest ever. So this is dedicated to them. There is one other topic. So, in the movie Dirty Harry, good old Clint Eastwood says, You got to ask yourself, do I feel lucky? Well, okay. There's pictures of 6 people on the next slide, and I will count to 5 when it shows up. If anybody can name all 6 in the count to 5, the first person, I will give them this $100 bill. And for those of you who cannot see in the back, this is what it looks like, right? It's non-negotiable, right? Didn't break any federal laws. All right, are we ready? So you got to ask yourself, do you feel lucky? Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Time's up. How about 5? Anybody up for 5? 5, 5, 5. Give me 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. All right, all right. So I'm going to make it real easy. I have a genuine wooden nickel here to the first person that can name one of these people. Don't worry. Time's up. You didn't do any worse than anybody else has done on this presentation. When it comes to money, the game's always rigged. Okay? Here's who they are. Don't worry about it. It's not important because you're going to meet them. And you're going to meet them through the agenda. We have 5 case studies, wonderful case studies. These are representative of innovation in science. So here they are. We'll have a conclusion and a parting thought. Let's start. Discovery of the New World. Now, we all know way back in Columbus's day, everybody except Columbus thought the world was flat. You know, like, how did that happen, right? They just thought it was flat. So, to get to, from Spain out to the Spice Islands, the Spanish and the Portuguese and everybody else like that would sail all the way around Africa, east. Look how far they had to go. And they wouldn't dare step off the ship, because if they stepped off the ship onto Africa, they invariably died. And we now know, you know, malaria, dengue fever, hideous parasites. Go do a web search on guinea worms. Woo, boy, that's the big one. Okay, so they would go all the way out there. The reason why they did that, they thought the world was flat. Well, sailing east was great distance. Columbus comes along and says, hey, new innovation. Toscanelli and I have been sharing some Starbucks. And guess what? World is round. You don't have to go east, you can go west. He picks up his BlackBerry and he tweets Isabella and Ferdinand, King and Queen of Spain, and he says, hey, guess what? Shorter western route. They invited him in. He gives me the 30-second elevator pitch, and Google Maps. We have a wonderful Google map here, gentlemen in the audience right now. Okay, and look at it. I mean, this business case speaks for itself. Imagine, you know, the internal rate of return, return on investment, you know, throwing some stochastic Monte Carlo future value of the doubloon, you know, analysis in there. You just look, it just speaks. It's easy. It's trivial. So Isabel and Ferdinand say, you know, golly, we're not navigators like you. We understand that yellow line is shorter. Let's turn it over to some guys who take a look at it. They turn it over to the Talavera Commission guys. And they go, look, guys, it turns out that everybody in the world knows the world is round. This world is flat thing was made up by Washington Irving in 1831. It is complete bunk. No basis for it whatsoever. It's complete trash. So, yeah, we know the world's round. And oh, by the way, that little yellow line, that's how long the yellow line is. You know, count the dots. Now, we now know that Columbus's estimation of the distance from Spain to Japan was off by a factor of 4.5. We know that the distance between Spain and China was off by 3.31. Way off. So how is it that these guys knew what the real distance was? And the answer is they were aware of this guy who 1,728 years before had calculated the radius of the Earth, the circumference of the Earth, and hence the radius. And it was Aristophanes. He was a Greek. He did it in Egypt. Beautiful, very simple trigonometry, within 1% if they use the right unit of measure for his calculations. So they go back and they think about it, and they come back and report to the Queen. They say, look, the guy's bogus. It has no merit whatsoever. It's completely bankrupt. Here's why. Right? It's going to take him 3 years to do this trip. It's not a short one. Right? The ocean out there, out to the west, is infinite, and we're not even sure you can get there. But if he gets there, you can't get back. But there's no there because there's no land. Ask St. Augustine. Trust me, don't tamper with that one. St. Augustine's in the way here. He's going to go through uninhabitable zones, and guess what? So many years after God created the earth, it is highly unlikely that any new lands of any value whatsoever will be discovered. Well, king and queen, they sit back, they do their future analysis, present value, money, and everything else like that. They say, expected value of this is close to break even, but let's do it. They pick up the iPhone, boom, they say anchors away, and thank you Toscanelli for that wonderful map. And that's the map, basically, it's believed that Columbus had. Is there something wrong with the projector here? There's this, I don't recall seeing the spot out here. Well, it's probably not important. Oh my goodness, look at this. Here we go. Well, it turns out that there was a problem. Unexpected development and, test organizational agility and, thinking on your feet and things like that. So, how did it work out for Columbus in the end? Here's how it worked out. Not my words, one of the greatest biographers of him. He was a great, great navigator. He accidentally discovered the New World looking for something else. What he found nobody wanted. They spent the next half century trying to figure out how to get around the obstacle because they wanted the real thing. And oh, by the way, they named the New World after somebody that had nothing to do with it. Its discovery. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Innovation 101. Case study number 2 of 5, continental drift. Now that beautiful, beautiful Google map here, satellite view of the world. If you look at that west coast of Africa, it looks as though that east coast of South America could just slide right up in there. Beautiful. I noticed it in the 5th grade. I would stare at this giant map in my 5th grade class for hours thinking, wow, isn't that weird? Look at that. Well, I wasn't the first. Here's the first published version that maybe there was a giant continent that had broken apart and drifted apart. It was done in, what, 1858. And look at all the people here that beat me. There's one of the gentlemen that you didn't know. He did it in 1596, right? This is right after the New World started, maps of the New World and Africa and everything started getting a little bit accurate. So these guys are right on it. May I draw your attention to the lower right-hand corner. Frank Bursley Taylor. Frank Bursley Taylor, 1908, gives a presentation, and he talks about how there's this thing discovered in 1870 out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And it looks as though Africa and South America are moving away from it in opposite and roughly parallel directions. Boy, that's got some bite to it. So the problem with him is he wasn't a member of the club. He wasn't credentialed. He had absolutely no basis to be talking to geologists about these very profound things. So he was ignored, but when he wasn't ignored, he was criticized. Here's a gentleman named Bailey Willis, and his comment on it, he says, sorry, everything's permanent, changes are only gradual, there's been no changes. Thank you, go away, don't go angry, just leave. So we'll meet Bailey later in the presentation. Well, here's a gentleman that did not speak, read, write English whatsoever. It was only German. Brilliant thinker named Alfred Lothar Wegener. And he came up with the idea as well. And instead of just continental shapes and drifting and things like that, he went in, he looked at the snails on the tips of both South Africa and South America. He looked at the earthworms. He looked at the glaciation marks. He looked at the wandering poles. It looked as though the poles had been wandering around, but he said, maybe it's not the poles. Maybe the poles have been constant, and the continents have been wandering around, things like that. In addition to that, he knew about Sabine Island, this island right off of Greenland. You can go to Google Maps, type in Sabine Island, Greenland, boom, there it is, right? It looked as though about every 30, 40 years, it was moving a quarter of a mile west from Europe, every 30 or 40 years. Now, it is moving, but he was off by a factor of 200 to 800. It's moving about an inch and a half a year, but by golly, it's moving. So what does he do? Well, in 1915, he publishes a book. It's titled, The Origin of the Continents and the Oceans, but it's only in German. Nobody reads it. He goes to World War I, gets severely wounded, comes back, war's over, right? Puts out second edition in 1920, German only. Nobody reads it. Puts out the third edition in 1922, translated into 4 other languages, one of them English, and boy, that was the Exocet missile hitting the aluminum ship. I got to tell you. To respond to the suggestion, in 1922, there was an annual meeting of the Geological Society of America, and he says, hey, somebody said, hey, if we're going to listen to this guy, we have to forget everything we've learned in the last 70 years. And that's why we're all coding today, ladies and gentlemen, in machine language. You know, none of this assembler stuff, right? None of this high-level language. You know, none of this scripting, because we understand how machines work, right? So, like, you know, these registers, you know, and condition codes, you know, predicate, you know, branching conditions, you know, instruction failing, and titanium, all that stuff, right? Wrong. They didn't want to abandon their intellectual property base, so they said this guy's got to be wrong. Now, this is science. And with science, you can always know in advance that the discussions are going to proceed on a collegial, nominal, friendly basis of discourse and exchange. Well, 1923, this guy says, well, you know what? He's in a debate in the Royal Society. He says, well, we discovered all of this, and anybody that values his reputation wouldn't be saying this stuff, but we thought of it already, even though it's bankrupt, it has no basis whatsoever. We already thought of it. So, and by the way, we beat him in the war. So there you have it. So, this is what he said. Wegener. He said there was a big continent. It broke apart. This is right out of his book, and it's kind of an ugly fit because the coasts don't want to go together. But he says, you know, maybe it's not the coast, maybe it's the continental shelves. But he didn't have the Google satellite data, right? He didn't have, you know, he didn't have a mean square fit or any of this other stuff. So he says, golly, I don't know. So these guys were called mobilists. Okay? Now, he got a mixed reaction across the world. Right? Arthur Holmes in the UK, one of the greatest geologists that's ever lived, maybe the greatest. He said, absolutely, we got to look at this. Right? Alexander Dutoit, South Africa, boom, right on the money. Reginald Daly, Canadian at Harvard, says, man, I think this looks pretty important to me. Warren Carey down in Australia, United States, absolutely not. Right? They're saying this guy's a shankopotamus. He's a meteorologist, an armchair geologist. You know, and I picked up this line just the other day, a heretical ratbag flat earther. That was out of Warren Carey's book, interviewing that. So, but at least it proceeded, you know, in a nominally civil manner, or not. There we go. Here's some of the comments here. And look at these guys. You know, Johns Hopkins University, Cambridge University, presidents of very important societies, on and on and on. And they are all piling on this poor German guy who is trying to actually get ready for the trip to Greenland that will kill him. That he will actually die on. So let's move on here. Yale. Yale weighs in. This is a textbook 15 years after that American Association of Petroleum Geologists meeting where they threw him out lock, stock, and barrel. And he says, no, there's never been any interchange. You know, everything's kind of where it is, and so on. I actually got this out of the library and checked it out myself. I don't know about you guys, but, you know, they look like those East Coast types. You know, kind of tightly wound and all that other stuff. Wouldn't we all feel rejuvenated if we had that breath of fresh air, West Coast flavor? Well, look, it's Bailey. He's back. Now he is chairman of the Department of Geology at Stanford University. And he says, you know, we're going to take this theory and just dump it in the trash can. All it does is encumber the literature, befog the mind of students. It's as antiquated as pre-Curie physics. It is a fairy tale. So this is 18 years after. They're still beating this guy up, even though, you know, the dead horse is laying out there on 101 and, you know, Shoreline overpass. So, and of course, you always want Uncle Walt to weigh in, and here he is. Columbia. He says, no. No legs there, just forget it. So, I don't know about you. I think we can sum this up right now. You know, we're all intelligent people. Let's make it so simple a Pentagon general can understand it. We ready? Here we go. Boom. Continents can rise and fall. Good. Continents moving around laterally? Bad. And what are we going to do to anybody that says that they move around laterally? We're going to lay the template of traditional geophysics down on all the reports, and we are going to exterminate with scientific antibodies anybody that breathes mobilism. That's what we're going to do. Well, remember that thing out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? It was discovered in 1870. It's called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And if you look at it closely, this is a shot of it from Google Maps again, right? There's a big crack there. In World War II, there was a gentleman by the name of Harry Hess, and he was out in the Pacific Ocean, not the Atlantic, the Pacific Ocean, and he had this newfangled device that was good for finding Japanese submarines. It was called sonar. And he left it on all the time, even when there weren't any submarines around, and he was mapping the bottom of the ocean, and he discovered volcanoes down there. He says, you know, wow, this is really weird. Why are there volcanoes down there? And he began to think that maybe there were cracks in the ocean floor, and there was movement and lava coming up. And he didn't name it. This gentleman here named it, Robert Dietz, and he referred back to that greatest geologist perhaps that's ever lived, Arthur Holmes, and talks about a conveyor belt effect, that there's a big crack, and the Earth is moving away from the crack like a conveyor belt on both sides, AKA Frank Bursley Taylor, and maybe lava's coming up in the inside. And the way it would work would be, you would have, right at that crack, you would have crystallized basalt. And as it passed through and cooled, as it passed through the Curie point, its magnetic materials would lock onto the direction of the magnetic field, its direction and inclination, as it turns out. Well, as it spreads apart, cracks on both sides, you get something like that. And guess what? It turns out the Earth's magnetic field reverses itself about every 10, 15 million years. So sooner or later, you wind up with something like this. Well, three gentlemen working the bottom two together and the top one independently, who got absolutely shafted because he tried to publish and he got thrown out by the journal that published the report on the other two guys. He said, if this is all true, when we go out to that crack, it ought to look like that. And he went out and they looked at it, and it did look like that. And it talks about how this conveyor belt is actually a tape recorder of magnetic direction over time, very symmetric, right? Wonderful YouTube, thank you again, Google, video of Fred Vine explaining this out on YouTube, how this all works. Absolutely beautiful. Right? So, fast forward a few years, 40 years after this conference, this gentleman here says, you know, we ought to go back and revisit this Continental Shelf Fit thing. The shoreline didn't work, let's do it. So he and two other gentlemen get together, and they do their least squares fit and, you know, crunching and everything else like that on computers that Wegener had no chance of having. 2 years after they did that, this gentleman, Maurice Ewing from Columbia University, an absolute powerhouse in the discipline, comes up and says, you don't believe all this rubbish, do you? Well, let me ask you, how does the fit look? It is spot on, like a 4% error. It was absolutely devastating. Now, if you look at that picture up there in the upper left, there's Alfred Wegener and his guide that both died, right, on a mercy mission that was unnecessary, that they didn't want to do. So they were already dead by this time, 35 years after this thing here. So like, he never got to hear this. So how do you sort all of this out? Well, it moves directly into plate tectonic theory, and it's still a theory. There are big holes in this theory, hypothesis, by the way. And this is something that's very close. You see the blue bullseye in the center? That's Haiti's 7.0 earthquake, right? And that's a problem of building codes, right? The yellow one there off South America on the west coast, that's Chile's 8.8. It was 68 times stronger, moved an entire town 9 feet west. The green one is the one that's cocked and loaded on the Cascadia subduction zone, right? They know to the hour when it last cut loose, and does so every 300 to 500 years. The hour it last cut loose was in a day in 1700, and the math is very easy. When that thing hits, it's going to impact Crescent City, Eureka, Eugene, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, Hillsboro, Oregon, Astoria, Vancouver, Washington, Tacoma, Washington, Seattle, and Victoria, and Vancouver, British Columbia. That's going to be the big one. That's going to be 100 times stronger than what happened in Haiti. So notice that it's all happening basically out on the oceans or just off the coasts, right? So how did it work out? Well, did the geologists now all get together and say, mobilists, we're sorry, you know, we're fixists, we were wrong, we love you? Absolutely not. The oppressors became the oppressed, and the oppressed, former oppressed, became the oppressors. And they laid on to these people. I mean, they just tore into them, right? And a reign of terror. And if you dared try to publish anything that had not been tectonic washed, you know, like green data centers and greenwashing and all that stuff, tectonic washed, you were run out of the discipline. So the other side effect of that is that the literature itself became very shallow and meaningless for about a decade. And there's a lot of problems in it now that have to be straightened out. So for Arthur Luther Wegener, right, turns out he was the real scientist, not the other guys that were criticizing him. They were upset about the fact that he had a single theory and was attempting to prove it. In the United States, they wanted multiple theories bouncing off of each other. Sometimes that works. It didn't work here. In addition to that, he also had some errors because he thought the continents plowed their way through the crust when in fact they were like corks being conveyed by these tectonic plates, things like that. So he didn't bat 1,000. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, John Maynard Keynes, better to be, you know, roughly right than precisely wrong. And then, by the way, you know, a lot of bad things can happen for a long time, and in the long run, we're all dead. Wegener was dead. Welcome to innovation. Case study number 3, Thunderstone of Ensisheim. Does anybody? Well, we'll get to this. Is really, I don't know what this thing is. This bugs me to death. Columbus is off of Hispaniola or Cuba sailing around, and this thing comes barreling in around noon one day. Big contrails and curling flames and sonic boom, and it just smashes and buries itself into the ground. Villagers dig it up. Emperor Maximilian's coming by. Takes a look at it and says, this is a good sign, a good omen for my battle that's coming up. So, want you to chain it down in a church because we don't want anybody stealing it. We don't want it wandering around at night, and we don't want it leaving in the violent manner that it arrived. And oh, by the way, stop chipping pieces off of it. It's, you know, had lost about half its weight by this time. So you know, this thing, I don't understand. This, you know, kind of round and sonic boom and thing. So I tell you what, if anybody here feels lucky, I got a $20 bill here. Anybody that will tell me, what is this thing? Does anybody know? Anybody have a, what could this thing possibly be? Did you, meteorite? You know what I like about a great audience, ladies and gentlemen, is there's always somebody that wants to see if I'm in on the gag. We all know there's no such thing as meteorites, right? They don't exist. But you know what? Since you're such a good guy and such a gentleman and willing to support, I tell you what, you didn't get the answer right because we're all in on the gag, right? And so I'm willing to give you $10. So how much is $10 with respect to 20? It's about half? There you go. Okay, here. A little press for money. Okay, so anyway, so let's move on. We now know what it's not, right? We're all in on the gag. So here we go. The reason why I know it's not a meteor is because I did the social math. Aristotle says there's no such thing as meteors. Isaac Newton says there's no such thing as meteors. Thomas Jefferson, one of the founders of our country, says there's no such thing as meteors. I mean, mineralogy, you gotta love it when you tap into that hive mind of conventional wisdom, you know, the wikinomic long tail strategies of everything, of thought collective consensus science. You get an answer really fast. It's easy and it's expedient. It's simply called appeal to authority. It's a winner. I mean, look at it. These guys here, who's going to vote against these guys? Well, so we know what it's not, and here we go. Here are the candidates that I found that it can be. And these are the ones that were prevalent. I take a particular shine to that lunar volcano because, you know, you can see the moon up there and there's all these craters and stuff, right? And if there's no meteors, what causes craters? Volcanoes. And let me tell you, when Tom Hanks and I went to Starbucks and we talked about the problems he had with this Apollo 13 aircraft, you know, I said, hey, I think that's it, Tom. He says, yeah, maybe you're onto something, Dave. I said, you know, look into it. And of course, there's a perennial favorite here. God is all powerful, and he's up there throwing rocks at us, right? So, you know, you gotta love it. So I don't get it. I mean, like, I appreciate I appreciate your effort, but, you know, God, I think, you know, well, let's move on. So there's this gentleman, Peter Simon Pallas. And Catherine of Russia really likes this guy. He's extremely intelligent, and he gives him a post in the Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg. And in 1768, he decides he's going to go do a survey of all the wealth and riches of Russia. So he goes out, and 4 years later, villagers bring him that thing. Now, that's another puzzlement for eternity, I got to tell you. I don't know what that thing is. And he looks at it and he says, ooh, this is definitely new. Never seen anything like this before. 21 years later, this gentleman is talking to one of the greatest thinkers and scientists in the world, named George Lichtenberg. And Lichtenberg says, you know these things that are barreling in, you know, and sonic booms and sticking in the ground and stuff, and Pallas? He says, I think they come from outer space. He's not in on the gag. Well, Chladni says, oh, I'm going to look into this. And he goes out and he interviews eyewitnesses, as many as he can find. And in 1794, he publishes this long-winded book about these things. And he says, hey, these things come in from outer space. He says, really? Well, it's very controversial, and they ridicule him. And I mean, can you imagine the guy actually went and interviewed peasants out in, you know, out on the nowhere? I mean, these peasants probably don't have Facebook pages or LinkedIn profiles. I mean, who are they? So, anyway, so he's getting dissed and written off. Well, it turns out 60 days later, the skies break loose in Siena, Italy. You know, all the Italians are out there, sono confuso. Oh my gosh. These things are rocketing in, you know, down to the ground. The Royal Society of England sends Edward Holmes out. They gather up a bunch of them, they look at them real careful, and they find this formation inside these things, and they call them chondrules. It's like, what are these things? Never seen these before. And 9 years later, the mother lode happens, boom, in Normandy, France. This thing comes in, dumps 3,000 to 4,000 large stones over this village in this ellipsoidal area, and the French Academy of Sciences sends out Jean-Baptiste Biot. He says, pardonnez-moi, monsieur, but I've looked at this stuff, and guess what? Meteorites are cosmic. They come in from outer space, and meteorites exist. So, small matter of 311 years to get to the right answer on the Thunderstone of Ensisheim. I mean, who could have known? My gosh. Oh. I guess you did better than I thought you did. So, now these are all small stones, right? All small stones. The reason why they're always small stones is that the atmosphere is impenetrable to large meteors. Large meteors can't get in, right? And there's this big hole out there between Flagstaff and Kingston, Winslow and Flagstaff, Arizona. So the USGS, United States Geological Survey, sends out Grove Carl Gilbert, 1891, says, what is that hole doing out there? Well, he sees all of these meteor fragments, just happen to be coincidental, around the rim and the surrounding area, but there's no magnetic anomalies down on the bottom, so he says, ooh, there's a volcano 90 miles away, and some lava probably went underground and hit some water, and boom, it's a steam explosion. So that's where it's at. Enter Eugene Merle Shoemaker. And this gentleman was a PhD student at Princeton, and his PhD thesis advisor, Harry Hess, you know, the guy with sonar, is telling him, Eugene, it's time for you to leave. Time for you to get out, write a PhD thesis, you know, taillights and car exhaust, that's all we want. Well, he's not liking what he's working on. So he thinks maybe this thing has been caused by a large meteor impact. And what he does is he goes out to Yucca Flat, where they've been shooting off nuclear bombs underground, investigates the craters that are out there, and he finds this new mineral called shock quartz. He goes out to the crater, looks on the rim, guess what he finds? Shock quartz. Everybody says, okay, Gene, you got us on that one. That's your gimme, but it doesn't ever happen anyplace else. He says, you know, I'm not so sure. So he's on his way to a conference in that center picture there, another great satellite picture from Google Maps, the satellite picture there. There's this depression in Germany with this little town in the bottom of it. It's 15 miles in diameter, and it's called Norlingen, and there's a rim on it. He says, I bet you that's one too. So he shows up at night, camps on the rim, he gets samples of rock from the rim, he takes it downtown the next morning to the post office and mails them to look at them when he gets back to Princeton. And his wife says, "Oh, honey, we're here in this really nice walled city. There's only 3 of them in the world. Let's play tourist." He goes, "Okay." And so they're walking around. You can actually see this church in Google Satellite View, rolling it, right in dead center of the town. He walks up to the stone church made out of rock quarried in the local area, takes one look at it, pulls out his magnifying glass. Lo and behold, it is full of shock quartz. So he's got it. So now they know, okay, there's a whole bunch of them. Now, if you're like me, after you watched Jurassic Park, you know, you kind of like wanted to have one of those velociraptors in your backyard to take care of the pesky neighbors' pets and things like that. Well, it turns out that 65 million years ago, something like this happened. And that's why we don't have them, right? Now, everybody seems to think it happened in Yucatan, and there's been some consensus here in the last couple of weeks that it happened in Yucatan. Don't be so sure. There are people that are pretty intelligent that think it actually might have happened over in the Deccan steppes of Deccan Traps of India. There's a giant volcanic area in there. It's just it did all sorts of bad things to the surface of the Earth. And oh, by the way, did you know that there was a major asteroid impact in eastern Oregon as well? So none of these things are settled. And of course, if asteroids and meteors can hit, comets can too. And Shoemaker was in on the Shoemaker-Levy 9 comet in 1994 that impacted Jupiter. If that had hit the Earth, we wouldn't be having this meeting, I guarantee you. And there is what is believed to be an impact chain from a series of comets on one of Jupiter's moons over there. Now, the reason why this is important is there's a black layer, particularly in North America, of very carboniferous material, and it is laced with nanodiamonds. And people believe that it's about 2,900 years ago, 3,000 years ago, a comet came in, and maybe that is the reason why all of the mammoths and everything like that got nuked, as well as the Clovis people and a bunch of other stuff. They don't know. It's still ongoing. So large amount of impacts. Case study number 4. Now this one I'm really sure about. I can tell you with full certitude and no mental reservation whatsoever, there is no oil in Texas. And the reason why I know that is because of this kind gentleman here. And back in 1885, he was notified about the fact that there might be oil in Oklahoma, and that was his statement. And let me tell you, when you get a statement that is this delicious, you better document it. And so I've got three places where I've seen this quote. I had somebody pound on me, this can't be true, it's too good. So how did this all work out? Well, it turns out that he was afraid. He was an executive in Standard Oil, and he was under the impression that they were running out of oil and none would be found. So he made this statement, and shortly after, he sold a whole bunch of his stock at a discount, like all good Wall Street people you'd want them to do with insider information. Well, now, there's always 10% of the people that don't get the word. I mean, you guys work in a large organization, right? There's probably a whole building over there of people that think there's oil in Texas. I don't know, right? This guy was in his day. He thought there was possibly oil in Texas. And he'd gone out to this area called Sour Spring Mound, also known as Big Hill, outside of Beaumont, Texas. It's this bump 46 feet above sea level. It's about a mile in diameter. And he could stick a stick in the ground, and it would bubble in the water, and he could light it, and it would burn. He says if there's gas there, there's oil there. So he wants to do a Series A IPO on his theory and, take it to the street, So he calls up, Lehman Brothers, and they say, no, we're funding important things. So he says, I need some credibility. So he calls up the state geologist, William Kennedy, comes out to Texas. He walks around with him, shows him the gas, shows him this, shows him that. Kennedy says, you're wasting your time and money, and to add insult and to injury, he writes an article in the local newspaper saying this guy's bogus. Do not touch this investment. He does not know what he's doing. Well, that didn't work out too well. So he goes again. C. Willard Hayes and Parker of USGS come out. He says, listen to your state geologist, dude. Like, nothing's here. That doesn't work. So he gets Standard Oil to bring this guy out, who's one of the top Standard Oil petroleum geologists in the corporation, and he says, you're never going to find anything here. Now, how many strikes is that? Is it 1, 2, 3? No, it's 4. Because 6 years he had already written the executives in Standard Oil in Cleveland, and he had said, hey, gotten this response back from Frank Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller's brother. And what they said was, no, we don't want to invest in your stuff, and oh, by the way, it's too much guesswork. And notice that they saved a nickel by crossing out the name of a former treasurer and using a different type there, to save the stationery. And add insult to injury, they misspelled his name. There's 2 T's in his name. So that's 4 strikes. Well, I'm sure that they're glad they did this, because if there was 1 to 10% of the oil that Patillo Higgins said there was in this area, what if they drilled down 1,000 feet? It would have been squirting in the air. And it's just utterly preposterous, because it's just Texas prairie land. Well, that's embarrassing. Maybe I need to prepare better for these talks. My goodness. Okay. Well, okay. All right. So maybe they drilled down a few feet and some salt water popped up. I mean, like, I can assure you that this is not what it seems to be here. And the reason for that is that, well, if there was really oil there under that much pressure, they could have drilled it like a pincushion. And how many oil wells do you see there? It's ridiculous, right? No, that's just wrong. Okay, so there were a few derricks out there, wooden derricks out there, and but this probably is just some fake digital image that Kodak, George Eastman put together in 1895, because they were going to invent the digital image or the digital camera 90 years later. So the reason why we can be assured that this couldn't possibly have happened is that if it was really under that much pressure and this many oil wells, they would have lost control of them, and there would have been like lakes of them out there, lakes out there with oil, millions of barrels of oil. Well, okay, this Obi-Wan Kenobi says, these aren't the droids we're looking for, let's move on, because this is probably just some catfish pond somewhere like in lower Alabama, or maybe it's a sewage settling pond in Alviso. That's it, that's Alviso, it's over there. So, because look, trust me on this, you can take this to the bank, it's from the heart. If there was that much oil exposed under that much pressure, can you imagine one spark, right? One careless match, a cigarette? Why, everything would have been burning. So the bottom line is in that hole, they found 150 million barrels of oil. That's what they found. So what was all the bad acting about that I was doing there for 4 slides? It's to drive home an experience called the Semmelweis reflex. It is the automatic rejection of the obvious without thought, inspection, or experiment. With innovation, this is a regular occurrence there. There are a lot of reasons for it. Here's one of them. Moral cowardice. If you're going to be an innovator, you better have some courage, and you better get ready for a scuffle. So, if you thought that was a big oil find, how about one 35 times bigger? Okay. This is the Black Giant. Over 30,000 oil wells in this area. It's how we won World War II. It drove the price of oil down to 6 cents a barrel, right? And then the time-honored taunt, I'll drink every barrel of oil you get out of that hole, right? Now, last time I looked, California is west of the Mississippi, right? Well, top 2 pictures there. It's Huntington Beach, late 1920s. That's what it looked like. It's not a little bit different from Surfing USA today. Down here, this is the greatest gusher that has ever occurred in the mainland United States. This is about 35 miles west of Grapevine on Interstate 5. Right? It shot 200 feet in the air, 20 feet in diameter. The wind blew the oil for 10 miles. The farmers and the ranchers were terrified that this thing was going to explode and incinerate all of their sheep and cattle that were out there. And it almost did. One well actually did. Created a 60-acre lake. It was going 100,000 barrels a day in its maximum. They couldn't shut it off for 18 months. It was just, I mean, it was beyond conception of this one thing here. Drove oil at the time down to 30 cents a barrel. So here's the question. Standard Oil, you know, they weren't in on any of this in the beginning. So you have to ask, organizationally, was Standard Oil stupid? And the answer is no, they were not stupid, right? They were handicapped by knowing too much about too little. And this is a condition that we all suffer from, and it's important to realize that we all do this, right? Electricity was on its way. As a result, the market for kerosene illumination was diminishing. Oil's everywhere. It's probably right under this building. But it's not there in enough commercial quantities, and the primary market for oil back then was production of kerosene. You needed paraffin to do it. Texas did not have the right quality of oil. There were no geological signatures, like in the northeast United States or any place that anybody had ever seen. There were no refineries, no railheads, no nothing. If they did find a bunch of oil, how to get it out of there. Right? There was no awareness of the role that salt domes could play. This oil was used for fuel oil, and it blindsided everybody because the internal combustion engine didn't even exist at the time. Gasoline was an obnoxious byproduct of the production of kerosene. They would pour it into ditches, burn it, or they would just pour it into lakes and streams. So, if you're a human, like we all are, want to see if this applies to something that you're invested in. Thank you, Arthur. Case study number 5. Honeybees. We're moving away now from geophysics. Now, this gentleman here won a Nobel Prize in, 1973 for his studying of honeybees and their interactions and how they communicate and find honey, nectar. So, 1937, he was fully signed up for one hypothesis where they smelled it, and then they zoomed in on the wind plumes and things like that. 1946, he changed over to the other prevailing one called the language hypothesis. You know, that's the waggle and the wiggle and, you know, sun inclination and, you know, magnetic field and, you know, storms and air pressure and all that other stuff. So here's a history of these two timelines. You have the odor search, and he shows up in 1937 in the green, and he moves over in 1946. Well, in 1962, 16 years later, there's another gentleman you'll see in the next slide. He signs up. He's on the wagon. He adds sound. This is, they can communicate with, you know, intensity of flapping and all this other stuff. And but he moves over in 1967, 5 years later. Now, what happened? Ladies and gentlemen, meet Adrian Winter, Professor Emeritus at University of California, Santa Barbara. What happened was he initially supported what this guy did and the thought collective. He supported it. But he went out and ran a bunch of experiments, and none of it added up. None of it added up. And he says, this is bogus. This is broken. This is bankrupt. It doesn't work. And he tried to publish a paper that said that, and he was completely thrown out of the discipline. He was not permitted to ever publish anything. He was not even permitted to respond in writing to anybody that criticized his work or his responses whatsoever. He was on the street. And he wrote a book about it titled Anatomy of Controversy. You'll see it in just a few minutes as we move along. And he says it doesn't have anything to do with evidence. It has to do with the sociology of the club. Well, he finally does get a paper out in the Journal of Insect Behavior, Volume 15, Number 6, November of 2002, but only because a previous student of his who gave $150,000 to establish a chair whose life Adrian Winter had changed was co-editor of it. It took them 2 years to get it in versus a couple of months. They pushed back. They did everything they could to stop it. He fought back, and he finally got it published. I got to tell you, I've talked with this gentleman several times. I wouldn't bet against him. But, you know, in the long run, we're all dead, and these guys can wait people out a long, long time. So here's a thought from Carl Sagan, here, that suppressing unpopular thoughts has no place in science. But guess what? Guess what? It happens all the time. This is the gentleman that is responsible for the Arecibo Radio Observatory in Puerto Rico, right here. He didn't bat 1,000. He thought the astronauts were going to land on the moon and sink out of sight and forever into moon dust. Didn't happen. A couple of other things he didn't do, but he is an absolute science heretic and absolutely brilliant man. He says it happens, you know, the suppression of conflicting information happens all of the time. So, and here is Mr. Dutoit. This is the introduction to his book that he put out that was roundly ridiculed and mocked. Turns out he is probably the greatest living field geologist in all of history here. And he was basically dead right. So you can be driven out of town, right, even though you're dead right. Now, you may think that I have cherry-picked examples. Actually, the experiences are present in virtually every instance in every scientific discipline. Here's just a few. And there's a book out called The Politics of Excellence, and it actually publishes the letters that were exchanged by the people who were picking who was going to get Nobel Prizes, right? Not all of these gentlemen are correct. Emmanuel Blonsky affair, right? The guy was dead wrong, but boy, they wrote him out of town, and that was the worst beating that's probably ever occurred. Another really good one is the Washington channeled scablands. I have that fully developed, but we can't get to it today. Okay, so now we're winding down, home stretch here. Resistance to change is probably a biological reaction to novelty, right? It occurs in everybody with different intensities. You need to make sure that if you're going to innovate, that it is welcome. If it is unwelcome, if novelty and new news is treated as bad news, right, don't even bother talking about it, regardless of where you are. Right. Innovation is very disruptive. It is an insult to the status quo. And people are pretty happy generally without status quo. Unlike Wall Street that privatized gain and socialized loss, right? Unwanted innovation socializes the gain and privatizes risk. You will look like that person that's unemployed. I guarantee it. You'll look like it, right? Because it gets the managerial antibodies up and going because we have these templates we lay over every situation, and we're magnificent at spotting deviation from the template. And we are, you know, we're template deviation machines. Right? Innovation typically involves a 4-letter word. Now, I value my invitations to come to Google and talk, so I'm not going to say that 4-letter word, and I'm not going to spell that 4-letter word. I'm going to let Tom do it. That's it. So, if you want to go after a competitor, what you do is you go in and you look at the industry that you're going to compete in, and you find out 5 or 6 different ways to compete that are different from what your competitor is doing. And when you do that, it is so unpleasant, it is so inauthentic that you will likely be ignored for the runway that you need to get up to speed and overrun them. It takes a lot of work. Okay? Last conclusion, do not be Panglossian, you know, Pangloss and Candide, you know, best of all possible worlds. Just try and be realistic about how it's going to go. Brace yourself, because you can be absolutely blindsided by the reactions to innovation. I mean, with a lot of people, there's no there for them to put it, so it just can't get in there, right? Thought collectives. Do a web search on the term thought collective and Ludwig Fleck. Beautiful concept. It's like groupthink, but it's much more powerful. You're going to have to hang in there. You're going to have to get cheap-shotted. And you want to save the easy downhill competitive path for your customers. Right? They'll do it. Great book titled Innovation, Attacker's Advantage. Lists the defenders' hubrises. Like there's 7 of them. It's beautiful. Try and listen to everybody to the point where you got a ship. There's a difference between ignorance and stupidity. With ignorance, you can go in, you can pop, and you can go in and reflash, and you can give a new load module, and boom, everything's off and running. Stupidity, there's nothing you can do about. Just because somebody doesn't agree with you and is arguing with you and doesn't get it, please, just like Standard Oil, they're not necessarily stupid. They're just unaware, and they are living within their cognitive bias envelope. Nobody bats 1,000, or is omniscient or infallible. You'll see that everything. I mean, like, you guys do a lot of projects, and you put them out there, and you know, they go out there, and they say, well, you know what, didn't work. So let's salvage what we can, and let's pull the string on it. That's what you have to do. Wonderful quote by Harold B. Hoffenberg. He says, science and companies and social activities usually are just best things that people can do at the time with what they have, right? Things change. So you need to move with the changes as well. Great article he wrote, Why Wars Are Lost, and it's by hanging on to the past too long. Richard Feynman, have lunch with him someday. Incredible guy. Expanding the frontier of science is an expanding frontier of ignorance. And so Feynman is saying, this Nobel Prize winner, I got to tell you, this guy was electric, absolutely electric. You know, you say. So this is my take on it. Omniscient Infallibility, that's in short supply. Haven't found any yet. Haven't found anybody. Welcome to the human condition. Right? So innovation is successive realization. There's lots of surprises. You're probably well served by not considering a surprise and labeling it with the word failure. There's a parting thought. Now, we're all in a big scientific struggle right now on anthropomorphic global warming, AGW. Right? I have to tell you, I wrote the corporate white paper for Symantec Corporation on the Green Data Center. Actually used some of your guys' research, right? And believe me, I'm all for renewable energy and green data centers and energy conservation, everything else like that. I have to tell you, the science on this stuff is not done. It is not over. There's going to be a lot of surprises in this stuff here. I'm neither an advocate or a detractor to the proposition of AGW. I honestly don't know. The problem is that we don't understand exactly how the sun works. They just admitted that about 3 weeks ago. And the good old thermohaline currents seem to be doing just fine right now. Surprise, surprise. And there's these wild cards of India and our good amigos over in Beijing. We don't know what they're going to do. And I haven't seen in many instances that they get A+ on playground behavior. So it's going to be a real problem. Even Al Gore says scientific enterprise will never be completely free of mistakes. I will follow Al anywhere, but only out of curiosity. The other thing is Wall Street has placed bets here, right? We're from Wall Street, we're here to help, right? Here we have Dick Fold and Mr. Repo 105. Ooh, didn't know a thing about it, right? Yeah, right. And then there's Bernie Boy, who's cooking over in Tennessee or someplace like that, right? There's a lot of things that we don't know that are going on, and a lot of forces that are in play. Here's a thought. Idealism is great, but as it approaches reality, the cost becomes prohibitive. And the guys over in East Anglia, I think, have been pretty thin-skinned. The good news on East Anglia is that we're all finally going to get the data that everybody's been asking for about 5 years. So maybe something can come of this. But this is George Lichtenberg, the guy that sent Chladni on his meteorite investigation. So here's some books you may want to read. Calculus Wars, Leibniz versus Newton, Longitude, how industry tried to rip off the guy that solved the problem. Eddington, how Eddington shafted Chandrasekhar on black holes. Of course, there's the standard, on structure of scientific revolutions. This book here, it's a very easy read. It was written 60 years ago. It is virtually forgotten. It is magnificent on unbiased critical thinking. It's one of the greatest books I've read. Bretz's Flood, the Washington Scablands Controversy. Bright-Sided, a book on the hazards of being Panglossian and hopelessly optimistic. And of course, Dr. Adrian Winter's Anatomy of a Controversy from Cornell. So, this is what it takes for me to put together a presentation like this. This is just part of my bibliography here. And it takes enormous effort because when you get involved in the middle of these things, you find out that what is documented in a lot of places is incorrect. And I've tried to go back to the original sources. Some of these books go back into the 1800s. And in my battleship evolution talk that I gave here, I actually used Google Books, encyclopedias that were published in 1885 at the University of Michigan. So it's a lot of work. I'd like to thank everybody for being so patient, and for the gentleman for trying to pull my leg on the meteorite scab there. It's been a privilege and a pleasure. Thank you very much. I'm here for questions.